Limited note so far, but the complaint just got home advised there's blood all over the house. I'm still trying to get further here, 1532. Further rescue notice, the mother appears to be holding the brother.
I'm going to indicate to you that you're not to have any contact with your daughter. She's involved in this case. So no contact means no contact. Do not call, text, write, no contact whatsoever until further order of the court.
A Florida mom, once with a seemingly stable family life, is now accused of killing her own child. Diana Cullom is charged with first-degree murder in the death of her 4-year-old son after police say the boy was found dead inside the family's home in St. Petersburg, Florida. Less than 24 hours later, Cullom appeared stone-faced in court, held without bond and barred from contacting her teenage daughter, the girl who police say made the gruesome discovery. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Wow. In this case, that is just so incredibly shocking out of Florida. And it is one about a family that on the outside looked completely normal and lived a life that looked very comfortable. A Florida mom, her name Diana Cullom. She's someone who had 4 kids. She had a husband who's reportedly a dentist and a dental practice that they helped build together. It was a life that, by all appearances, was stable. And then, according to police, something went horribly wrong. Investigators say that Cullom's 16-year-old daughter came home from school and walked into a scene that no one should have to see. Blood throughout the house and her 4-year-old brother dead. And now, before we go any further, I want to be clear that this case is still unfolding and everything that we're talking about here is alleged based on what police and prosecutors say happened. But here's the part that has stopped so many people cold as this story has made headlines. Police say the person they believe is responsible for that little boy's death is his own mom, Diana Cullom. And to understand how chaotic and confusing those first moments were, how terrifying those first moments were, I want you to listen to what first responders were hearing in real time.
Limited note so far, but the complaint just got home advised there's blood all over the house. I'm still trying to get further here, 1532. Further rescue notice, the mother appears to be holding the brother. It was possibly a story if one tried to kill the other.
That is responders trying to process what they're seeing as this case was unfolding. Police say Diana Cullom was found injured and taken to the hospital. The following day, she is arrested and charged with murder in connection with her son's death. And then we see her for the first time since she was arrested and accused of a crime that is just impossible to comprehend. She appeared in court by video, and she was stone-faced. She was silent. She raised her hand as she was sworn in. She had visible injuries on her arms.
I'm going to indicate to you that you're not to have any contact with your daughter. She's involved in this case.
And in that same courtroom, her husband sat in the gallery, his head down, covering his mouth at times, as he appeared visibly shaken and stunned at what he was hearing. Now, there's one detail that police have confirmed but have not explained, and we're going to go back to it in just a moment. There is a note that was found inside the home. What it says has not been released by law enforcement, but why it matters may be key. We're about to talk to a criminologist who studies cases exactly like this, the ones that don't fit the stereotype, where everything looks, quote, normal right up until it doesn't. Now, let's walk through what police say happened step by step. So according to investigators, all of this unfolded on a Tuesday afternoon in St. Petersburg, Florida. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, a 16-year-old girl gets home from school. But when she walks into her family's house on Tanglewood Drive, almost immediately, she realizes that something is very, very wrong. Police say there was blood throughout the home. The teen girl keeps going inside and she discovers her 4-year-old brother. His name was Finley and he was unresponsive. Officers later say that his mom, Diana Cullom, is also there and she is injured and she's holding the child. First responders are called and what they encounter is chaotic. And at that point, they don't know yet what caused the child's death, how many people are hurt, or even exactly what they're dealing with. Now, here's a little more of what we hear on that audio per Broadcastify.
It just looks like rescue's going to be responding. Limited note so far, but the complaint just got home advised there's blood all over the house. I'm still trying to get further here, 1532. There's a long fishing knife on the floor near the mother's bed. Further rescue notice, the mother appears to be holding the brother. It was possibly his where if one tried to kill the other. On the bed, we're still waiting on further 1533.
So initially, there is confusion about what happened and how the child died. Officers on scene believe that he may have been stabbed based on the amount of blood inside the house. But later that night, after the medical examiner is able to conduct a full examination, investigators say they determined that the child did not die from stab wounds. Police say that Finley was suffocated with a plastic bag. Now, as detectives continue processing the scene, they say that they found two important items inside the home. There was a knife and there was a note. Investigators say the knife was found on the floor near the bed where the child and mom were discovered. Authorities believe the note was written by the mom, but as we mentioned earlier, they have not released what it says or explained its contents. Police say that no one else was home at the time, and notably, they say they had never been called to that home before. No prior calls for service, no known history of domestic disturbances. Investigators confirmed that the child's dad was not home when this happened. He's notified after police arrive at the scene. As for the teenage daughter, well, she and her dad are both interviewed as part of the investigation. And by the next day, after Diana Cullom is released from the hospital, police put her under arrest. She went to the hospital with non-life-threatening wounds, according to law enforcement. Right now, she is charged with first-degree murder in the death of her 4-year-old son. And less than 24 hours later, we see Diana Cullom make her first appearance in a Pinellas County courtroom in Florida. And she appeared by video from inside the jail. Her arms were crossed. She didn't speak. She didn't really react. At one point, she raised her hand to be sworn in, and the injuries on her arms are visible. Her expression never changes.
I'm going to indicate to you that you're not to have any contact with your daughter. She's involved in this case. So no contact means no contact. Do not call, text, write, no contact whatsoever until further order of the court.
Now, this is the same teenage daughter who police say came home from school and made that horrific discovery. In the courtroom gallery, her husband, who's a dentist, is seated in the front row, and he just keeps his head low. At times, he covers his mouth with his hand. He appears visibly shaken by what he's hearing. Cullom is ordered held without bond. She's also barred from having any contact with her teenage daughter. Now, before all of this, Diana Cullom wasn't someone most people would have clocked as being capable of something like this. On the family dentistry's website, Diana is presented as a central part of the business and the life that she and her husband built together. Her biography reads, quote, Diana assisted her husband opening Crescent Lake Family Dentistry. She oversaw the construction and renovation of the 1920 building from start to finish. Her goal for his practice is to provide a warm and inviting atmosphere, making patients feel at ease while receiving top-notch, personalized quality care. The biography goes on to describe a full and busy life, saying, quote, she and Dr. Cullom have 4 wonderful children. In her free time, she loves to spend time with friends and family, time with God, business ventures, and charity work. Now, that's the version of Diana Cullom that was publicly available. A business partner, a mom of 4, someone who deeply was involved with her family, her faith, and her community. Property records show that the family's home, the same home where police say Finley was murdered, was listed for sale just days before his death with an asking price of about $1.3 million. Authorities have not said why the house was put on the market, and they haven't indicated whether the decision is connected to what happened next. Joining us now to help us try to make sense of this terrible story out of St. Petersburg, Florida, is Dr. Debbie Goodman, criminologist. It's always great, Dr. Debbie, to have you here on Law and Crime. You look at the suspect in this case, and it's just, I know that we've seen a lot of stories where it's like they were the perfect family on the outside, and it becomes this kind of cliche thing. But this family truly seemed like that there wasn't anything, no warning signs, no calls of domestic disturbance in the past, successful business, beautiful family. Like, how do you make sense of how something like this can happen? I mean, do things like this? Maybe that's the first question. Do things like this really just happen out of the blue?
Right. Well, good morning, Chris. And as always, thank you so much for having me on. I would say yes, because we are talking about an individual who makes a decision. So you're 100% right. We're peering over the fence, so to speak, and everything seems perfect and rainbows and sunshine, but clearly anybody who's potentially participating in a murder, it's a very deep, dark, disturbing decision. And Chris, just for the viewers to have a little bit of context and perspective on this, as a criminologist, I always like to classify the crime. So what we call this particular crime is filicide. And that speaks directly to when a parent kills his or her own child. And I just checked the data, and the analysis is in 2025 at or near 1,900 cases took place last calendar year. So it's very disturbing, very alarming, and especially when we're not sure what the prompt was, what motivated her. So, we go down the list, of course, of what we know, and what we know generally, not yet specifically, but what we know generally. When parents kill a child, we turn toward, of course, mental health. Was there some type of circumstance? Is there depression, neurosis, psychosis, schizophrenia that may have been a part of this decision making? And also, Chris, we have another theory in criminology when it comes to these types of parental decisions, and that is called the disposal theory, whereby individuals may literally just dispose of their child because they feel the child has become an impediment, an interference, an inconvenience. And if we just look back at our history of crime cases, who does that describe? Susan Smith, Andrea Yates, Diane Downs, Lori Vallow. So it has happened before in circumstances that really appear very startling, very shocking, and not expected.
And we'll see, as more information comes out, what was in a note that was left behind, what was the motive, allegedly for this to take place. But to think for a family that, is running this, successful dental practice, everything seems so great. And then suddenly the next day you're, in the same breath as like Lori Vallow, Andrea Yates, it's just incredible to think of just how something like this could happen. And it stood out to me too, because the announcement of her arrest came before she made her first court appearance. So, we started looking into just who they were, the family, and then you see her in court and she's stone faced. And it always, I know body language can be very difficult and sometimes unfair to analyze and say that we know exactly what someone is thinking. But I also it always stands out to me when it's like, here's someone who was living what seemed like a very normal life. And then suddenly, it's over. And we'll see if she's proven guilty, but certainly it's not the same as it was, a couple of days ago. And yet there's no emotion on their face. Like, as a criminologist, how do you make sense when you see someone in that moment with that type of expression or lack thereof?
Right. I saw the footage that you're referring to in court. She looked really emotionless. And, here are those moments for these killers. Do they feel remorse? It's really a question mark. I think many of whom do not, Chris, believe it or not, unless we literally see like water being shed from the eyes, this whole idea of crocodile tears, right? That we saw with Susan Smith going on media platforms 9 to 10 days. And I looked at this woman, Miss Cullom, and it almost seemed like she was detached from the whole circumstance of which she was being charged. I think we also saw, like on her arms and hands, a lot of those scratch marks and potentially stab wounds, again, early on, information being disclosed. But what might be forthcoming is, did she attempt self-harm? You see, the issue of the note, too, is very curious to us. How and why does a potential defendant leave behind a note? Was it really designed as a murder plus the self-harm? I think that might be something forthcoming. But yeah, I was pretty fixed on this lack of emotion that she seemed to display. And to me, as a criminologist, it speaks to a lack of remorse.
Yeah, and I think too, we'll learn more about her mental health history, and whether there were, we know that there weren't any previous domestic calls to the home, but were there, was there cases being done? Was she, being treated for any sort of mental health issue? Like in these cases, and clearly, when someone is, in this case, she's accused of taking the life of a young child. For those of us on the outside, it's easy to say, well, that's someone who's mentally unwell. But when it comes to having a specific diagnosis, when you look at cases like this, how often is it that it's a schizophrenia that's involved, or severe case of depression, or how does that compare to cases where it might be something going on in the life, whether it's financial issues, whether it's, marital issues that factor into something as horrific as this?
Right, Chris, and really, I would say it's all of the above. Everything that you mentioned is a potential outcome. Again, with Susan Smith, there was allegations of she wanted to date a young man who potentially expressed he didn't want children. So, hence, in that regard, I would say absolutely disposal theory. She wanted to remove the children from her life, seemingly so that she'd be able to date this individual. Andrea Yates, another very severe circumstance of mental health, because we know the outcome, and sadly, tragically, the murders of 5 children in the family bathtub. But Andrea Yates had something very rare, Chris: postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis affects about 1% of women who have participated in childbirth. More common, of course, is the postpartum depression. And then, as you mentioned, Lori Vallow Daybell here, we have this woman who not only killed one of her husband's ex-wives, participated in that killing, also participated in the killing of her own fourth husband, but so alarming that she killed her own children, Tylee and JJ. But would we say she has a mental health issue? I think anybody capable of killing their own children, Chris, it's such a heightened level of evil, and some way, somehow, they're able to rationalize how and why it has happened, and seemingly so, these people think that the child deserved it.
How do you go about figuring out whether there were warning signs? In issues. I mean, certainly on the front end of it, again, no previous calls from police. We don't know. I don't know these. This family personally, and be able to speak to, what it was like day in and day out in the house. But I mean, how do you go about figuring out the background and piecing together how something like this allegedly happened? So then, gosh, you hope in the future. I mean, talking about how many of these cases last year we saw. How do you go about figuring out, piecing together the past in hopes that this doesn't happen again in the future?
Right. It really is a fascinating process. And what I like to do is I like to actually start with victimology. See, with victimology, we're really focused on the victim. In this tragic circumstance, we have a 4-year-old child. And the question is, with whom does that child most interact? Well, clearly, first and foremost, the mother, the father, the sister. Sadly, it was allegedly the teenage sister coming home to find this atrocity. So we start with victimology, and then from there we know the circles in that person's life. And so clearly we think we know who did it, but the question of why. Now we look at the defendant and Miss Cullom, and then the circles, if you will, or the individuals with whom she's interacting, and what are those relations. You see, it is true. It appears as if it's the perfect family, well educated, well adapted, but we just don't know. Was there discord and disharmony? I think in many of these instances, Chris, yes, there is. You're right, though. No call for police service, so it didn't necessarily get to that heightened level, let's say, of any type of intimate partner violence. But we don't know. It could have been a trigger, literally, very quickly and instantaneously. If, let's just say, hypothetically, Miss Cullom found out that there might have been an extramarital affair, or if some way, somehow, with the teenage daughter, something was going on in her life. So it's so unfortunate, but the tipping point of human behavior and how and when these decisions are made, it's not always a very lengthy, planned, and premeditated decision. Sometimes it can be almost like a knee-jerk reaction, a response a reaction to something that the individual feels has just become an unraveling type of circumstance.
And this is a tough part of the story to talk about, because you just feel for the 16-year-old daughter who came home and witnessed the scene, having to call 911. And you just think for her, and you hope that she gets, whatever sort of treatment and help that she would need going forward. The fact that Miss Cullom, according to law enforcement, it wasn't something where she ran, she hid. It appears that she tried to harm herself based off of what we've been told by law enforcement. What does that say? How does that factor into the way that you look at this, as opposed to, going back to Lori Vallow, where it was this big mystery for a long time about what happened to these kids?
Right. It does happen. It does happen where the defendant himself or herself is the admitted participant in the heinous crime. So I think when that does happen, it's almost like a resolution. They are resolved now to face whatever the penalty is. So I think that it speaks to, in some part, her knowledge of wrongdoing, the fact that she wouldn't run. She stayed there thinking, terribly. I don't know if she realized it would be the daughter coming home or potentially the husband coming home, but she appeared to not be in a position where she was able to even help the child or make the 911 call herself. Sometimes we see those instances happening too, where the defendant, whether it's a husband-wife scenario or the siblings themselves or the parent-child, sometimes that defendant, even after the fact, makes the call to 911 for medical service.
And just a horrible, horrible case out of Florida. So many questions unanswered at the time that we're recording this. We'll see what new information comes out. But you just think of this family and the impact that this has had on them, and we'll see what happens next. Dr. Debbie Goodman, always great to have you on Law and Crime, criminologist, helping us make sense of some very, very difficult stories. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. My pleasure.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and now you can find episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.